Welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of the Meta Timeline series. This is a regular YouTube exclusive series that Rainey and I are doing for the SuperMagicalCup. Make sure to subscribe and check out all the videos in this series because we're going to cover everything from the game launch all the way up to present day, going through every balance update and talking about what the game was like and the changes that happened in the game over the last several months.
So in the last video, we were talking about the February patch, and this was a huge update. It brought a lot of game changes. This particular video will be about the numbers, the balance change. So Seth, why don't you just take us on a journey and talk about how some of these cards really, which ones were the strongest ones and which ones were the weakest ones.
Yeah, let's get into those balance updates right now.
So Rumham, what was the meta moving into this patch update?
The meta was really defensive. At the time, every single defensive tower had a 60-second lifespan. So the problem was that, you couldn't actually attack with normal beatdown stuff. Giants and Valkyries and stuff weren't good enough to actually crack through. So everyone just played very defensive siege strategies. You'd sit behind your Inferno Tower and play spawners or play X-bow or even just fireball and rocketing towers over and over again because it wasn't profitable enough to actually come across the river and attack in the face of 60-second long Tesla towers and Inferno towers.
Interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these changes and see how Supercell attempted to try to shift some of these cards to a more favorable situation, especially for offense. So the first one, arrows damage decreased by 4%. Again, another 4% change by Supercell, but still, I think, and as you would attest to, arrows was a very popular card at the time.
At the time, you have to remember, this was before Poison existed. Poison actually comes out in the first new card update, which is later than this, and Zap at the time didn't stun, so it wasn't very popular. So if you think of how often everyone plays either arrows or Zap, at the time it was just all arrows. Nobody played Zap at all. So arrows, it says even in the thing, is the most popular spell card in the game, and really the only other two you ever saw was Fireball and Rocket, both of which were pretty popular as well.
And those seem like, how you mentioned the meta was, those seem more kind of like cards that are staple in your deck in terms of I want to win.
Yeah, you almost pretty much always played either just arrows or arrows and fireball or arrows and rocket, right? Or if you were a totally defensive deck, you'd play fireball and rocket, right? It was one of those things where those three spells were pretty much the entire spells that you saw.
Probably the next change is something that'll be very interesting to a lot of players.
Yeah.
Freeze gets its radius reduced. Was the freeze radius really that big?
It was bigger than arrows. Arrows has a 3.5 radius. Freeze had a 4. You can see in the footage how big freeze is. It's so big. It was so big that if you tried to split stuff up, you'd still catch it. You could play Musketeer by the river and still get caught in the freeze. This was a huge nerf to freeze, but you'll find out it actually wasn't enough. They reduced the radius. They reduced the scaling duration, but the base duration was still 5 seconds at the time. So even with scaling going down a little bit, freeze would last for over 7 seconds at max level and was huge. This was a thing where it tried to nerf freeze because it was so popular. It's really the only way to attack through all those defensive towers like Inferno and stuff. But after this patch, you actually saw more freeze because the defensive towers were hit harder than freeze really was.
Sure. The next change is going to be talking about the Wizard, and as you mentioned in kind of our first video that we did, the Wizard was one of those cards that was really popular.
Wizard was the most popular support card in the game by far. Every single deck had Wizard in it because Musketeer at the time cost 5 elixir and had less damage than it would later. They later reduced its cost to 4 and then buffed its damage up. So imagine Musketeer being worse than it is now at the time you're watching this video, while also costing 5. Everyone played Wizard. So one of the first things they did to Wizard was decrease its damage by quite a bit. 7% is almost a full level, right? To Wizard to try to just push people away from it. Cards between arrows and Wizard being really popular, it was really tough to get anything swarmy through minion hordes and things like that. So this was the first real change that came into big support troops.
Now, interesting to me, the next change that's listed is Barbarians got their hit points reduced, but probably, I feel like it's probably one of the most ineffective changes in the history of the game.
Yeah, I feel like this is, again, one of those 4% suggestive changes. Maybe there was something where Barbarians were taking 3 hits to kill instead of 2 hits or something, and they wanted to just tweak it down a little bit for that one interaction. Barbarians aren't changed again for, 6 months and going. It hasn't been, at the time we've made this video, this was the last change ever made to Barbarians. So I just think it was a little suggesting. Barbarians were really popular because they're one of the few tanky, buffy things that you could play. And I think they just wanted to try to encourage people to try out some other cards instead.
Sure. Bomber, as referencing our first video, one of the worst cards in the game.
This was, probably one of the worst cards in the game. Even with Barbarians being popular, it showed how bad Bomber was that nobody played it. Well, everyone played Wizard too. So one of the ideas that this is a 5% damage buff, right? Going from 2 seconds to 1.9 seconds is a 5% attack speed increase. Bomber probably gets more buffs throughout the course of this series than any other card. This was the first buff, and it did nothing. Nobody started playing Bomber after this. Bomber gets like 2 larger buffs much down the road. But yeah, this is the first attempt to try to make the little guy see more play. Didn't quite work.
Interesting. Let's move down to one. I think it's probably one of the more interesting changes that Supercell made is to the Golem.
This was actually the first rework that they did that didn't massively change maybe the elixir cost or anything like that. So at the time, Golem had far less hit points, and the Golemites had way more hit points. And what that felt like was the initial Golem was kind of wimpy. He sort of died and blew up to the Inferno Towers that were so popular. But those 2 Golems after were nuts. They were so strong. So the 2 Golemites would do a jillion damage, and I think this was a good change. They wanted to make the actual Golem itself very intimidating, and the Golemites are more like there to help continue the push. But I swear the Golemites used to do more than the Golem itself. I remember being very worried about this change. People were just discovering that Golem was good around right before this patch hit because, again, 1,700 trophies was Arena 6. It took a while for people to get there, and it took a while to then to loot the epics and get them leveled up. So right before this patch, people were just starting to be like, wow, this Golem card's really nuts. And I remember seeing this change and thinking, oh, I don't know if this is going to be a nerf or a buff or what. Post-patch, it ended up being about the same. It wasn't a huge change to it, but I remember being very happy to discover Golem and being very nervous about this change when I saw it at the time.
Interesting. So going along with changing how their big bodies would play in the game, their next update is about P.E.K.K.A, and it's going to be a hit point decrease and also a cost decrease.
Yeah, this is interesting. So again, Inferno Tower being so popular made P.E.K.K.A just like unplayable. It was too slow, easily distracted by stuff. Spawner decks were also really popular, and so, you know, the P.E.K.K.A would never actually make it. This was their first change to try to get P.E.K.K.A more played. So at the time, they both cost 8, and people would just prefer Golem over the P.E.K.K.A. So I like that they reduced the cost by 7, which is about a 13% cost reduction, but then they only reduced the hit points by 13%. So they left the damage the same and all the other stuff. And I actually think this made P.E.K.K.A a much more appealing, like, oh, it's cheap, it's a big tank, right? But it's cheaper than the other big tanks while doing a pretty large amount of damage. I think if they would have nerfed the damage as well, it would have been kind of a bummer. But this was this was the change that started making things like P.E.K.K.A Prince and P.E.K.K.A Witch come around. After this patch is when you started to see people playing these 7-cost P.E.K.K.A, although it took a while to catch on.
Sure. So probably the next change is one of the most impactful for the meta at the current time.
Yeah. Expo was so dumb. Expo was just seen in like every single deck. Like it was just the most popular archetype by a significant margin. This is weird. These were supposed to be 2 nerfs, and it ended up being a nerf and a buff. So the hit points decreased by 15%. Nerf, right? Like take its hit points away. But only targeting ground actually turned out to be an improvement to the Expo, because what you used to be able to do was to play something like Minion Horde in front of the Expo. Now the Expo shot air, so it'd start shooting it, but because it's got to go like, okay, 1 minion down, 2 minions down, the minions could actually jump up and swarm it. But now it would never get caught up in that thing, and you just play your Expo and it'd almost immediately lock onto a tower. You can arrow the minions or whatever to get rid of them, and now it was just focused on that. The only real like change that Expo couldn't kill is it used to be really good at killing Baby Dragon, which is a popular card at the time, but now it couldn't kill Baby Dragon. But overall, locking onto a tower turned out to be like much better. So this ended up being, they were trying to nerf Expo. Expo still remained very popular after this patch. But that was their first attempt to try and change it. Yeah.
One step.
Imagine when Expo used to shoot air, though. That was nuts. Defensive Expos, where you played it in the middle of your base, maybe not shooting the enemy towers, but just covering stuff, was so dumb and shot everything, right? There's nothing you could buy it.
Yeah. So the next change is kind of the wombo combo to try to prevent Siege from being as dominant as it was Inferno Tower, which you talked about a lot.
Yes, Inferno Tower was the best. But what's crazy about this change, so let's talk about the change first. First, it goes from 60 seconds to 45 seconds. Now, at the time we're recording this video, Inferno Tower has a 40-second lifespan, so it actually gets nerfed even further from this later on. It goes from 60 to 45. The big change, though, was the retargeting got a lot slower. It used to actually, like, you have a minion horde coming at it, it would, like, kill one and immediately lock onto the next one and just keep burning. This change was designed to allow you to swarm it a little easier so that it would, if it killed something, it would take a little bit, before locking on to the next person, right? Which I think is a good change. What's interesting about this change is that even though Inferno Tower saw less play, with all the other towers still at 60 seconds, it didn't fix the problem of defensive decks being too strong. You nerf Inferno Tower, but now Tesla has 60 seconds. Bomb Tower has 60 seconds. People can still sit back behind their towers after this change, but this was the first of those changes to try to be like, all right, this tower's the problem. We're going to fix this tower. But if you watch over the next few episodes, they do that with every single tower in the game until they're all
they
at 40.
realize.
Yeah. They're like, this tower's too strong. And then Tesla's too good. And they're like, this tower's too strong. Then Bomb Tower's good. And they're like, no, this one's too strong. Like, and now they're all at 40 seconds at the time we're making it. So this is the first one of those. Yeah,
we made it eventually.
We got there. But what we kind of mentioned, though, that when we were looking back historically, this was like the age of siege decks. Siege decks were so popular because of the power of defensive towers. And actually, even though Inferno Tower comes out, let's look at this next update where we introduce a new tower.
I really, really like this change because it kind of forms the canon that we know and love today. And really, what was canon like before this point?
Canon was the worst card in the game before. The first month of the game, it was the worst card. Like, literally, I don't think I saw one. I played it in a friendly battle just to see what the model looked like. It cost 6 elixir. And it did the same damage that it does today. I don't think at the point that we're making this video, I don't believe Cannon's damage has ever gotten nerfed, only its hit points. So it had the same damage it has today, except cost twice as much. Its range was slightly larger. So let's talk about the changes, right? It goes half price, half cost, huge change, right? Going from 6 to 3 is a massive change. The range going from 7 to 6 is interesting because it is the only defensive tower that gets outranged by musketeers, which is good, right? And the lifetime goes down to 40 seconds from 60. Now, later on, Cannon goes down to 30 seconds, but again, like, they just didn't know what the right lifetime was, so it goes down to 40. What's crazy is that they cut its cost in half. They cut its hit points by a little more than half, so you think, like, all right, kind of fair, right? Except that later on, Cannon gets its hit points nerfed again and again and again and again. So imagine what Cannon was like after some of these changes, right? It was so good at this time, but I don't think a lot of people realized it because Hog Rider wasn't so popular and Royal Giant didn't exist yet. So while they nerfed Inferno, they sort of made this awesome cannon card that people kind of discovered later. It took maybe a little bit for people to figure out how good cannon was.
And thank God it existed because, as we'll find out in a few patches later, it's going to be the land of you will go to sleep and you'll hear Hog Rider in your head. Just everywhere.
Minor note, this was the patch that Hog Rider started saying Hog Rider. Prior to this patch, he didn't have any sound effects.
He just
boing. Yeah, just boing. Yeah, just landed. But then he started going, Hog Rider! Yeah.
Anyways, continuing on with Siege, I think we talked a little bit about this, about Mortar and Expo kind of finding their own individual styles. Tell me about this change.
Yeah, so this was another card where Mortar at launch cost 6 elixir and was basically just a common version of the Expo. And I think while they were nerfing Expo, they also decided, like, you know what, we need to split these cards up. We need to make sure that there's like different reasons to have these two different cards. So Mortar got a huge rework. Damage, or its cost gets reduced by 33%. Damage is decreased by more than that. Lifetime down to 20 seconds. So it was a very short duration shot, and then of course the range gets pulled in a little bit. It says right here it's one of the least used cards because Expo is just simply better. So they thought that maybe reworking it would make this popular, but actually Mortar wasn't popular at all because the 20-second lifespan only allowed it to shoot like 4 or 5 times if it was totally unhit, and it just wasn't enough damage, right? It was one of the things, the attack speed was so slow and the lifetime was so short that even if you just ignored it, it wouldn't do like that much damage. Right. So they ended up, even though this is a cool rework and it's formed the base of the Mortar we know today, this was not the Mortar that actually won any sort of games or anything after it.
All right, the next change is going to be, I think, a really, really good change, but also a very curious one because as a result of it, I don't think anything actually happened. But
you want to know how much Mirror sucked in the game came out? Mirror just copied cards at the level of the Mirror. Full stop. So if you had a level 2 Mirror, it would make level 2 Barbarians. Well, like, why would you want to ever spend 6 elixir to make level 2 Barbarians? So the only thing you'd ever mirror with it was epics, other epics. So, you know, maybe Mirror Balloon, Mirror whatever, Golem. But you would not ever mirror commons and rares. Maybe like an elixir collector, but again, do you want a level 2 elixir collector? Like, maybe not. So this was the first time that it actually started mimicking the levels of rare and common cards. What's crazy though, if you look at this, even though they introduced tournament rules in this patch, and tournament rules are epics level 3, rares level 6, commons level 5, so there was that ratio of like level 3 epics to +3 to a rare, +5 to a common. They didn't make mirror match that. So because the max levels at the time were epics level 8, rares level 12, commons level 12, rares level 10. So they made it so that a max level mirror would make a max level common, right, 8 to 12, but in tournaments, a level 3 mirror would only make a level 7 common. So like mirror was still not really good, even in tournament caps. And because even at max levels, level 12 commons weren't as good as level 8 epics, you still weren't really mirroring rares and commons. So I think this is a cool change, but it just like wasn't enough to get mirror all the way, unless you were mirroring epics, which you could do. That was, I remember mirroring golems. That was the thing you could do. Because again, nobody attacked. Nobody could ever punch through damage, right? So nobody was ever coming at you with like hog riders and stuff. You would just play an elixir collector, like golem, let the golem walk up and then mirror the golem because he's like coming at you.
What else would you do?
Yeah. Next one. Bomb Tower is one of the least used cards. This is foreshadowing, by the way. So notice that they increase the attack speed of Bomb Tower, which is effectively a damage increase. It says it's one of the least used cards. It was least used because Inferno Tower was better. Very shortly after this patch, it's not right away, but Tesla Tower becomes popular. When they end up moving Tesla Tower and nerfing it, Bomb Tower gets all these like random buffs along the way.
It's just like a line. It's just all these towers are waiting in lines. Like, oh, it's my turn to shine.
Yeah. So it was used. It wasn't used much because it was Inferno Tower was too good. But once Inferno Tower and Tesla start to move out of the way, Bomb Tower ends up becoming the tower that runs the format for a while.
All right, we're getting towards the end of the list, and there's one more big change. Barbie Hut's getting their hit points increased.
This is actually probably the least significant change in the history of the game because they nerfed Barbarians, so they were like, all right, well, because we nerfed the health of Barbarians, we want to buff the health of the Barbarian Hut just because, like, whatever. Yeah. But this didn't really change anything. Like, Barbarian Hut was already sort of kind of played, but the 10% didn't do anything. Like, maybe it makes it a little more resistant to rocket, but I mean, I don't even want to even talk about this change anymore. It's to this day, Barbarian Hut has not really been played that much, and it was, that was part of it.
Elixir Collector production speed increased from 9.8 seconds from 9.9 seconds. What does this mean?
What this means was that the first month of the game, Elixir Collector didn't work. So Elixir Collector takes 70 seconds to make 1 elixir every 10 seconds, so it makes 7 elixir over 70 seconds. But it did not create elixir during its deploy time, but the lifetime was going, but the elixir collector wasn't ticking. So what would end up happening is it was bugged and only made 6 elixir. It would pump 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. It would pump like 9.5 seconds of the 7th, and then the lifetime would go out and it would break. So elixir collector only made 6 elixir. This was the change to make elixir collector work and actually make 7 elixir. So for the first month of the game, elixir collector didn't exist, which further made those defensive towers so strong because you couldn't. I mean, you could, but it wasn't really worth it just to sit back and pump up and make all this extra elixir. So after this patch, Elixir Collector very quickly becomes one of the best cards in the game. But before this, it was a 5 for 6. Who cares?
All right, so moving on. Rumham, after we read through all these changes, tell me what you think were the best cards of this time period.
After this patch, Giant Skeleton was probably the best tank in the game, which was kind of funny to think about because at the time it had a 1 second timer on its bomb. So what happens if no matter what, kind of think how like poison, if people bunch up all their stuff, you can play a poison and just kind of take out the whole wave with some other supporting stuff. If they had a big thing, I mean, it didn't matter, right? Barb's giant backed up with archers and wizard, didn't matter, right? You'd play the Giant Skeleton in the middle of their push, they'd kill it, he'd die, 1 second later he'd blow up in this huge radius and blow stuff up. So that was one of the most commonly played sort of catch-all defensive cards. Inferno Tower was still really strong. The 45-second buff or nerf helped, but it was still very strong. And of course the other towers like Tesla and stuff, it wasn't unheard of to see a deck running like 2 towers. You'd run like Inferno and Cannon, or Tesla and Cannon, or whatever, right? So while they did some good changes to do offense over defense, it was still a very defensive meta after this patch. It was still very expo heavy, and what I think you'll see over the next few videos is that Supercell started getting really committed to the offense over defense and made more and more extreme changes to encourage offensive style gameplay.
Interesting. So the terror of the Siege era continues, despite the fact that Supercell is trying to push the game in a different direction. And as you noted, it was kind of a very slow process of like towers 1 by 1, not really making the changes necessary to really push them out of the game. in a very real sense, and just a lot of adjustments and changes to small numbers to try to see what would stick and what would make Siege kind of less effective than it was.
And what you see is you can tell that they didn't do enough with this balance update, because this is February 2nd. I believe only 2 weeks later another balance update came out, and that'll be episode number 4 of the meta timeline.
So make sure you guys are following and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because Rumham and I are going to do more of this meta timeline series. Rumham lending us our expertise from the prehistoric era of Clash Royale, and I'm excited to find out what happens in the future.
Yeah, and let us know what you think. Leave some comments below so we can further improve this series. We want to do this all the way up to the current age, and your feedback really helps. We read all the comments, so let us know what you think, and of course, throw us a subscribe here at SuperMagicalCup so you can catch the next episode in the series.
All right, we'll see you in number 4.